I know.
Right. The new democracy.
Yes, we are doing a great job. Thank you very much for asking. That's a great question. Right.
Yeah.
Especially for this next upcoming fee increase. Let's definitely use that format.
I have lots of congratulatory questions I'd like to offer myself.
All right, folks, I have put us live on YouTube. In another minute, I will start our webinar, and then I will let you know when we are live and we can begin. But between Bill or Mike, it might be good to make that announcement that we are not taking any questions from the audience so that they know.
I will say something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to start our webinar, and then I will let you know as soon as we are live and we can begin. We are now live. You may begin.
Good evening. My name is Mike Ostrom. I'm CEO at Horizon House, and welcome to the residents of Mirabella, Skyline, and Horizon House for tonight's program with our new Seattle Mayor, Bruce Harrell. This is a first for our three communities here in downtown Seattle. It's a first because we haven't joined together for any programming or events, but we thought with the occasion of having the mayor here to address major concerns like public safety, that this was an important thing to come together on, and we hope that you agree. Now I'd like to introduce the leaders of our other retirement communities who are co-hosting our event this evening. Travis Duncan, the Executive Director of Mirabella, and Ken Noreen, the Interim Executive Director of Skyline and Vice President of CCRCs at Transforming Age, the parent organization to Skyline. Travis and Ken, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. I just want to say a big thank you to Mike and the Horizon House residents for kind of dreaming this event up and putting it together. It's always great to work collaborate with other communities because we're all in this together and we all want the same thing. And public safety is such a big issue for all of us and our residents. And also a big thank you to the mayor and his office for putting this together and being willing to come talk with our residents tonight.
Yeah, and I would just like to add to Travis's comments. We're very excited to be coming together with our partners at Horizon House and at Mirabella, and also thanks to the mayor for his willingness to address our mutual concern of public safety. But if you could indulge me, I'd also like to welcome our Transforming Age team members. We're actually live streaming this throughout our entire system. So we have our residents and staff at Skyline, as well as our other communities, which include 5 communities in Seattle. We have 28 communities overall in the Pacific Northwest, as well as the Midwest, and they all have an opportunity to tune in to see what's happening in the city of Seattle. Just a note about Transforming Age, we have deep roots in the city. Our first community was Park Shore on Lake Washington, which opened its doors 61 years ago. Today, our impact in the city extends to 5 not-for-profit senior living communities, workforce housing, home and community-based services to low-income seniors, as well as our affiliate SHAG, which provides affordable housing to low-income seniors in the Seattle area. All told, we serve about 15,000 people. We have 2,000 team members with a dedicated not-for-profit mission. We look to enhance the quality of life of our residents. And I would just add in closing, the work we do, it relies on a solid partnership with the city to ensure high quality of life for those that live and work and play in our neighborhoods. And we are grateful to Mayor Harrell for his willingness to present to us tonight. And we're also grateful particularly to our friends at Horizon House for organizing it and Mirabella for also supporting it. We look forward to hearing what you have to say, Mayor Harrell. And, we are anxious to learn how our communities collectively and individually can help support your efforts to ensure public safety in the city of Seattle.
Great. Thank you, Travis and Ken. So why are we doing this? Well, public safety is important to our current residents, our future residents, and to our employees. And we appreciate that Mayor Harrell has agreed to join us this evening to share his plans for continuing to improve and deal with this complicated issue, and hopefully give us some suggestions on how we can help in the effort. Before we get started, let me offer some background on our mayor. Bruce Harrell was elected mayor last November and took office in January. He was born in Seattle to an African-American father and Japanese-American mother. He was graduated from Garfield High School as valedictorian, and he attended the University of Washington, where he received his BA in political science and later attended law school. He played football for the Huskies and was selected as the National Academic All-American First Team. Mr. Harrell spent his first and early career in technology and telecommunications as an in-house attorney, and later joined a downtown law firm representing employees, youth, small business, and nonprofit organizations. He was elected to the Seattle City Council in 2007 and re-elected twice. He was twice re-elected City Council president by his peers, one of just a few to ever serve multiple terms in that role. And in 2017, he served as interim mayor, and now as a result of the November election, Bruce Harrell will be the mayor for the next 4 years, and we look forward to hearing from the mayor in just a moment. But first, a word about our format for this evening. First, we'll have an overview from Mayor Harrell, and then moderated questions submitted by members of each of our communities. The questions will be moderated by Bill Anderson, a Horizon House resident, and we won't, for this particular event, be taking questions live. Our moderator, Bill Anderson, is a graduate of Yale Law School, and Bill joined the UW Law faculty in 1964, and for the next 4 decades, spent his time teaching constitutional law, urban government, and finance here and around at universities around the world. He's been a resident of Horizon House for 10 years and has served as president of the Residents Council. Now it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce the Honorable Bruce Harrell, our Mayor of Seattle. Mayor, it's all yours. Whoops.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm having some computer problems, and I noticed that. That's why I'm on a phone. So I want to get back to my computer, but it's saying that I'm not having microphone access to a browser. So let me get off the phone for a second, and let me try to. I may have to reboot the computer. Just one second. I'm blowing my first impression, but it is what it is. Bear with me. All right.
All right. We all have these challenges. For those of you just joining, we're waiting for Mayor Harrell to reboot his computer and get back online. So hopefully we'll be ready to go here in just a moment.
Okay, so what I may have to, I think what I'll do is I'm going to sign off the computer and just use my phone. I think that's going to be the best option at this point. So bear with me. Okay, am I transmitting okay?
You are.
Very good.
Okay, let's give this a shot. Well, thank you. And it's always my pleasure to spend time with my friends at the Horizon House in Mirabella and the extended network of people that you've allowed me to visit via I'll say virtually. I'll share a few minutes with at least my vision of what we're trying to do here in Seattle and talk about the opportunities and the challenges. And then I suppose I'll just open it up for Q&A. I do believe that my Director of Public Safety, Andrew Meyerberg, is also on the call as well. I don't think that I have any other of my cabinet members on the team, to my knowledge, because I'm transmitting from a phone. I don't have the ability to see everyone as I would ordinarily on a computer. So in a couple of weeks, you're going to actually see what we are describing as a public safety plan. Most mayors don't have one. They work on staffing issues, policies, strategies, but they really haven't talked about their vision for what a public safety plan, what a safe Seattle plan looks like. I've been in office now since January of this year, and the department that I inherited, quite frankly, was low in numbers, specifically less than 900 officers when we should. My goal would be to be around the 1,450 officer level, which when I was public safety chair were optimal staffing levels were less than 900. I inherited a demoralized police force. And by that, I specifically mean officers that felt underappreciated, heavily criticized, no trust in what they can do. And I also inherited a narrative in this city and this country that one must abolish police departments, or they must defund police departments to achieve an unracialized approach to public safety and perhaps a less of a militarized attack on innocent people. That was the narrative that was very prevalent in our country and certainly in the city. Whether it's true or not is not the point. The point is that this is the hand that I've been dealt, and one that I fully accept. And our approach was to make sure that we argue with data. We argue with the fact that people should have 7-minute response times, and that the crime rates are unacceptable, and that every person, regardless as to their age, their socioeconomic level, their race, their religion, whatever demographic distinction you would like to describe, should feel safe and be safe. And we wanted 7-minute response times, and we wanted to build trust in our different communities. And we started a very aggressive approach to, number one, saying that's what we believe in. We think that is right. And as a person who was born and raised in this city and have seen much safer times, I said, we will lead with that. This forum is about public safety and not necessarily about homelessness, but there's a correlation between our homelessness strategy and our public safety strategy, that the same conditions which can create a lack of cleanliness or lack of safety often overlap in some of the areas where you see people who have fallen between the cracks in our society, whether the causes are drugs or alcohol or mental illness, or other just types of unacceptable behavior. Again, I think we all know the opioid and fentanyl crisis has taken so many souls. Whatever the causes are, that you'll see people struggling with income inequality and falling through the cracks, and you also see higher crime rates in the city of Seattle, which is per capita one of the more affluent cities in the country, actually the second, that we're no stranger to the crisis in this country. So our public safety plan looks at the fact that we will not racialize or militarize our approach. We will always lead with compassion. But what drives our policies and our recruiting procedures, and I'll sort of close that before I talk about Q&A, what drives our behavior is making sure we have our charter responsibility to keep everyone safe. And we take that very seriously. That is our highest charge. So having said that, our biggest challenge, of course, right now is recruiting officers. We only get so many slots in the academy. And so we look at a twofold approach. One would be recruiting talent from our city or from other jurisdictions to see who would like to protect and serve. Which communities have we not tapped into? Number one, so those would be new officers that are of age and could go through the training necessary to be fine, outstanding officers. The second approach would be lateral transfers, officers who are experienced and trained in other jurisdiction. It's a condensed or a shorter version, a form of training that's necessary, but they still have to go through Seattle-specific training. They go through a field training officer kind of system. And then the third approach would be and then they become fully fledged officers. And so in that process, I was successful in allowing some funds to be released from the city council, about $450,000 of money that were a cause of underspent money because of our low numbers. And we're presenting a plan to the council to release another pocket of money, which should be in the millions, to do a full-fledged recruiting effort. And so there we'll not only look at recruits, but lateral transfers from other jurisdictions who would like to come to sunny Seattle to protect and serve. And in that vein, we want to make sure that the culture we're developing in our police department, and that's part of my job as mayor, is to develop a new kind of culture that recognizes the value of officers, but also the value of cultural competency, to make sure that, again, we are strong, but we are fair, and we master de-escalation, and we realize that all lives matter, Black lives matter, that racializing our approach and using unreasonable force is unnecessary, and that we listen to even the voice of the youth who want to see change. So in that approach, we fully embrace being able to use modern techniques and good public safety best practices to make sure everyone is safe. So recruiting from both sides of the spectrum, laterals and new recruits, and hopefully our numbers will be up very soon. And in our city will be much safer as a result of our efforts.
Thank you, Mayor. Now I think we can move to questions, and I'd like to get things back to Bill Anderson, who has a series of questions from each of our communities.
Thank you, Risa. Well, thank you, Mayor, and I really appreciate this opportunity to moderate these questions. I'll try and be as moderate as possible, but I will tell you that the original plan for this program was to collect questions from all three of these institutions, Mirabella, Skyline, and Horizon House. And I had a thought that we would get 4 or 5 questions from each, and then we could just sort of read them out and let the mayor respond. I wind up with more than 40 questions, Mayor, and I don't think we can go into all of them tonight in the time we have. So what I've decided to do was simply to acknowledge that the questions come from all three places. We have good questions from Mirabella, good questions from Skyline, good questions from Horizon House. And I've had to kind of, some of them duplicate, some of them overlap. And what I've had to do is just sort of consolidate and get them down to a number of questions that seem to me to bother most people. And we won't get through all of them tonight, but we may have to do this again, Mayor Harrell, to be sure that we get all our questions put to you. But tonight we'll get the principal ones. And I can start by saying that one of the reasons why this organization is so, these three institutions are so interested in public safety, and that is that we are a bunch of people, 1,500 more, mostly retired professional men and women, who deliberately chose to move to a retirement center very close to downtown Seattle. Lots of other places around, leafy suburbs and lakeside places and what have you. But the people in these three institutions really focused on downtown. And the reason was, and we've surveyed this many times, they really wanted access to the restaurants, the theaters, the museums, the galleries, the shops, all of the things that you have in a downtown that's thriving. And that's what they wanted their retirement life to be like. And so they are here principally because of the attractions of downtown. And now it turns out that it's becoming less and less comfortable for them to walk downtown, to be downtown, to shop downtown, to go to the theaters and restaurants downtown because of all the things we're seeing around us, the homeless population in the parks, on the streets, boarded up businesses, broken glass, all the things that are not attractive to go to. Threats of personal safety. We've had some reports here in Freeway Park in the last day or two of people who wandering through Freeway Park have been accosted by folks there. And that just doesn't make it comfortable, doesn't make it pleasant, isn't the retirement life that these groups had in mind. So we are especially concerned about things like public safety. Now, of all the questions we got, everybody wanted to know about the new police chief and when you got a search committee, what the search committee is going to be, the search firm, who the residents are who are going to be, citizens are who are going to be commenting on choices and so on. Well, that was all a mystery until today, or maybe yesterday, when you made your announcement that you now have a search firm looking for the police chief, and that process is underway. And I take it from what you said that it's going to happen pretty soon. Now, what I think all of us would like to know, and this is asked in different ways by different members that do questioning people here today, what kind of person do you think is able to take over this Seattle situation as chief of police and do what has to be done? What do you think about that general question, Mayor Harrell?
I think it's an outstanding question, and I would certainly want that question answered directly. And I will answer the question directly. I know exactly what I'm looking for, and that's exactly why I didn't prematurely set up a evaluation process or selection process, because Chief Diaz, someone who I've known since he was an officer, was the interim chief, and I had to at least put some weight in my predecessor mayor's decision to hire him as the interim chief, see how he could perhaps conduct himself as a leader with me as a mayor, that I would always afford a person that choice. By way of background, I was a chief counsel of a major corporation. I was a managing partner at a law firm. I hold a master's degree and a Juris Doctor's degree, and I'm SHRM certified, meaning I'm a senior certified human resource management professional. I do not say that to brag. I say that to say that I'm very good at evaluating people. I know how to set up a 360-degree feedback loop process. I know how to objectively evaluate excellence. I've been a supervisor of many people in my life. And I say this to say what? That the kind of person I'm looking for is a person that, number one, is tireless in their commitment to protect people. They're not afraid to make bold and creative decisions. They'll do the hard work. The hard work means looking at the data, looking at the research, inspiring your rank and file, holding people accountable, having a standard of excellence that, bar none, I will be the best chief I possibly can be. And I'll go around the country and examine other chiefs, and I'll set a bar very high in terms of professional conduct, in terms of whatever motivates a person. I will learn to be the best. A person, when he or she walks in the room, that the people will say, you know what? I may not agree with everything he or she says, but I know I have the right person in the room making the right tactical and practical and strategic decisions. A person that commands that kind of confidence in not only the rank and file, not only in top leadership, but in the people, okay? So they not only know strong public safety, but they understand compassion. They understand trust. Trust is not something people freely give you. You have to earn it. So they have to be able to help transform the police department, because I have some fine officers in the rank and file, but they have been demoralized. And I think that the new chief that I select, will have to understand that. And when I see that skill set, I see that personality, I see that intellect, I see that commitment, I see that wherewithal, we'll have the right chief. And that's what we're going to have when I come out of this process.
Well, we wish you well in that search. That's an excellent statement. I noticed the monitor who was watching the Seattle Police Department under the auspices of the federal court with this consent decree has issued a report in the last week. You've seen it, I'm sure, and Andrea, I know, has. About 150 pages long, and it talks about the challenge facing the Seattle Police Department now to bring it into line with the consent decree requirements. And a couple of things that is noted. One is that the police department has to get back to having people trust them. And what happened in 2020 and that business has left a lot of people in doubt. And that's where you referred to some of the statements about defunding the police and that sort of stuff. That whole body of thought, it seems to me, comes out of the difficulties that occurred in 2020. And another thing that is mentioned by this committee or council, whatever it is that does this monitoring, is that we have to be able to root out the racial issues that exist in our police department. And they found disparate impact. Some minorities are stopped more often, treated more harshly than other citizens. That kind of disparate impact and the underlying racial components that make it have to be rooted out, according to this report. And I think that's going to be a very important challenge for the new chief. So that's another layer of it. And I think that's implicit in what you said. Now, could I ask about what's happened to most of us watching all this happen is that starting with the tragic death of George Floyd and the various difficulties that arose after that, there began to be this thinking about redefining the police mission. And I think that's something that you've addressed it. They talk about defunding the police. They talk about changing the police, making police a different sort of person, different kind of officials than the gun with the badge kind of policeman that is the historic model. Where are we going with this? Is that something that can be done in terms of finding the people to do it and finding the will to do it and getting the city council to accept that and the citizens to accept it? If it causes difficulties with the law enforcement process itself, how do you react to that, Mayor Harrell?
That's a great question, and I'll try to be short on my answers to allow more Q&A. So yes, it can be accomplished, and quite frankly, you know, as a resident here all my life, I've spent time in, and I think many of you know by my introduction, I'm a person of color, and I spent time in the faith-based communities working with my community, my African American and my Asian community, and all people of color that have been very vocal in the racial problems or tension and issues associated with heavy-handed police departments. And we started, for example, a race and social justice forum at First AMA Church many decades ago, where we'd have young people of color and police officers and prosecutors and sheriffs and judges all come together to talk about what should happen out there in the field. We're building trust. And so under my leadership, we're going to rejuvenate that kind of effort. We will redefine the police officer, how the strategies that we now realize, particularly because of the drug epidemic, that we do not need a gun and badge going to mental crisis situations. There should not be lethal force for routine traffic stops, that you can't justify that in most circumstances, unless, of course, an officer is defending himself or herself. So this is where things have gone sideways so much in our country on just a failed taillight. Now, having said that, you know, I was the one that passed the bias-free policing law. I was the one that passed the race and social justice initiative for the city. So I am heavily in tune with what happens out there in the field. The challenge we have, when you look at even the reports coming from the monitors, you will not see any officers that will readily admit, you know what, I am being heavy-handed on people of color, that I am stopping more African-American pedestrians for bike helmet violations than their white counterparts. You don't hear anyone freely admitting that. So then what's occurring then? Well, I need to know what's occurring. Is there implicit bias that's occurring? Are there other factors at play in terms of human dynamics? So we're going to uncover all that, but I'll be the first to say that I do not need a gun and badge visiting a woman like Charlene Lyles, who had a mental illness challenge, who had called the police, I think, 19 times, and who, because she was somewhat delusional and had some mental challenges, and she ends up dying at the hands of police officers. I don't need the officer. I need a mental health counselor or crisis person who could intervene on crisis intervention. So that's the department we're going to be creating. I call it a third department.
Somebody asked the question in our collection of questions here, when we're talking about teaming up traditional officers with people who are mental health experts or addiction experts. Has the Seattle Police Officers Guild been asked about that and what their reactions have been. Anything you can share with us on that question?
Well, I don't have, when we talk about the Seattle Police Officers Guild, that's not like one person, right? That's the rank and file, which consists of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. I talked to every single officer I could about all of these issues. And quite candidly, they are very excited about my administration and our leadership. They know how thankful we are for their service. And I met with 3 officers today. Just full disclosure, if I seem a little tired, I was in Washington, D.C. yesterday. I caught a 5 o'clock flight, or I guess an 7 o'clock flight to get here, which means I woke up at 2 o'clock your time, went right to the office, put in a full day of work, met with the woman who was bitten by the dogs from a person that had homeless who was in a homeless encampment. You know, we held a press conference at Woodland Park today. We've been working around the clock, and I put those kinds of hours in. And I'm just saying this to say, I also met with 3 officers today in my office for about 45 minutes to an hour, talking about these issues. And what they are saying is, number one, is that they applaud us on trying to recruit people and changing the narrative, that they want to do their jobs, and they think they're getting an unfair narrative that's describing what they do. So I don't have a body of officers saying, yes, this disparate impacts on use of force or use of violence or arrest records is abysmal, and we admit it. So what we're trying to do is unpack the data. Mm-hmm. And when you unpack it, that doesn't mean you're blaming anyone. You're just trying to better understand it. And quite frankly, there are people much smarter than myself and others that can help unpack the data. So I'm looking at behavioral analyst types to say, what does this mean? For example, if we agree that if the bike helmet violations, that there's a disparate impact on people of color, particularly African Americans, on the number of violations, why is that occurring? Does that mean that the officer are making racial decisions or something else? So before I just jump to the conclusions, I need to better understand what that data means. And that's what we're doing as well.
I see. One of the questions that we get, I had several in these collections, has to do with the difficulty of recruiting new officers. We're now down about 30% or more of what the budgeted number ought to be. And the question is, can we hire new ones? A lot of them are leaving, and the circumstances may not be favorable for some to come and work in Seattle. But also if you're talking about increasing officers and other mental health experts, addiction experts, and other people who can solve some of these other problems, you're talking about money. And it seems to me there's been some difficulty getting budgets out of the city council that match some of the aspirations you have. Do you have any reactions to that you can share with us?
I do. Now, it's very hard to get applause from people in the work we're trying to do. I said today, we're not taking victory laps, but there's been a few things that people need to take pause and look at. Number one is the council was at a log jam with a few council members on trying to allow my administration to release monies for incentives and tuition assistance and relocation money to allow me to recruit officers, right? There were budget provisos the council had put in place before I was elected along the lines of this defund movement. And I was successful in at least convincing or impressing upon them that is not what the voters want. The voters want me to build up a strong and effective police department. And I will produce them a plan in a matter of weeks on what the recruiting strategy looks like. Just signing bonuses, just a one-time check to get them to sign is not sustainable, number one, and the data would suggest that that's not necessarily what these officers want. So what we are doing right now is we're asking officers, why did you come over as a lateral transfer? Why did you leave? We know one of the biggest factors why people left is because they were demoralized. They were underappreciated. So that's the first part, is making sure that the city appreciates what they do. There are some other things we can do that we will do. For example, tuition assistance is a big one. perhaps allowing someone's spouse to help their spouse with employment opportunities as well. So we're looking at some cities use an incentive for dual language capabilities. So if a person speaks another language, that might be an added incentive, and many cities are using that to recruit culturally competent or people that are multilingual. So we're looking at a whole gamut of incentives to make sure we are recruiting the best. But the best source of recruiting are the officers themselves, the best source. And so we're having conversations with these officers to help us. It's just like if you're on a team and you're looking for teammates, the team are the best recruiters as well. So we're pulling out the playbook, drafting the playbook right now, and we'll get our numbers up. The other thing I wanted to say when I talked about, if you look at May Day, for example, or you look at a lot of the work we're doing right now, you're just not seeing, and knock on wood, you're not seeing a lot of the drama, if you will, the police misconduct, if you will, that you have seen in the past. Now, I'm not taking credit for that. I will take credit for this, that everywhere I go, when I'm talking to President Biden, I'm talking to Vice President Harris, I'm talking to other mayors, and I've met 3 mayors, the mayor of Philadelphia, Oakland, and San Francisco in the last 2 weeks. I'm going to meet the mayor of DC next week. Everyone I talk to, I'm evangelizing what Seattle is about. I recruit everywhere. I believe in this city. I love this city. Remember, I was born right up there at the Breeding Hospital on Capitol Hill. So I'm going to rebuild this police department because that is our charter responsibility. That is the job of the mayor. And so I'm out on the front recruiting, and you'll see the numbers. You'll see it pay dividends here very shortly.
Well, that's good news. And I just hope that you can get the support from the city council you need for those aspirations. There's another item here that we had some questions about. That is a sort of public safety issue, but not in the sense of crime, but in the sense of things like, you would call it pedestrian infrastructure, sidewalks, walkways, roads that are unrepaired, cracks, broken places. And the people in our age cohort, of course, a number of them have mobility issues. And we have wheelchairs, we have canes, we have walkers. And the sidewalks are not very easy to get around on in this city sometimes. Is there anybody looking at that particular kind of public safety question?
Absolutely. So to be very specific, and I try to use math whenever I can, or whenever I'm capable, that, and it's not as though we ever want to criminalize poverty. I'm very quick to say that we need to give poor people help, and people with mental illness treatment, and people with drug and alcohol issues treatment. This is a health issue. But I also contend that if you look at, for example, our jail population, that there were, in recent times, within the last 15 years, you might have seen the jail population up to around 350 to 400 on a daily basis. COVID changed some things. The King County changed booking policy procedures, and their bed count in the city rents jail space from the county, as you well know. Right now, we usually have around 60 to 70 people, as opposed to 300 to 400 people in the jail. Now, this is good and bad. And it's good in the sense that we don't want to criminalize poverty. We want to look at restorative justice and do what we can. And we don't want to have to put people in custody. The bad is that there are some bad people out there, and some bad people need to be put in custody. And so when I look at math to see what we're doing, if I'm to impress upon the city that there are behaviors downtown that cross the line into severe criminal misconduct, then there has to be consequences for that. And so I'm talking to both the municipal court and the city attorney to make sure that the consequences are real. Right when a mayor talks like that, people get the wrong impression that I want to punish someone that is down on their luck. Anyone that knows me as a lawyer and a community activist in the city for 40 years would know that that is not my style at all. My wife was the CEO for United Way. We have been in the health and human service business a long time.
Do you have any reaction to the city attorney's policy on when
prolific.
Misdemeanors will be prosecuted.
Yeah, I think she's heading down the right path. And I think she also understands restorative justice, that, you know, two people may look like they're committing the same crime, but they could be doing something that just looks like that. And one may need help, and one could be preying upon the other. In the drug epidemic world, there are people preying upon people with addictive behavior. So we don't treat them all the same. At the end of the day, we look at individual treatment for individual offenders. And we have to, in the homelessness world, we say we have to know the person we're trying to serve and treat, know them by name. So in my approach in 3rd Avenue and 4th Avenue and areas in town like that, I don't go in blindly. I make sure that my police officers have intelligence on people. They know what activities are occurring, and that we act accordingly. But I've said publicly, I'm not trying to strong arm this city into public safety. That could not be sustainable. And I don't think that's what the city wants anyway. Most people are fairly compassionate. But I have 2 grandchildren. I want to be able to hold my grandchildren's hand and walk anywhere in this city. And we don't have that right now, and we will have that under my leadership.
Well, that's good news. That's good news. And again, the best of luck if with moving in that direction. We have, again, I've referred to this monitor's report that was handed down a couple of days ago, which talks about the police and talks about the underlying concerns that they have. And they'll be continuing to monitor the police department as they try and get it closer and closer to complying with the consent decree. And these are people who are data driven. I mean, if you've seen this report, it's 150 pages of numbers about how many of these and how many of those that we've seen. And I think that's something that perhaps some reaction from potential aspirants for the chief's job might spend some time studying. That's right. Well, we could go on. There are many questions about police here, but I think the essential one is you've already addressed, and that is the need to somehow redefine or enlarge the mission of the concept of police to include more what you would call compassion and experts and people who know how to deal with issues that raise issues of compassion. And I think that's going to be interesting to watch and hopefully will help. Now, you mentioned housing a minute ago, and we agreed that the public safety, the principal issue is tonight is not housing, but you can't think about public safety in this town if you ignore what's happening to the homeless. The part of what people are concerned about when they say they're feeling unsafe shopping and going to restaurants and theaters in the city is that they have to cross areas where there are homeless people living, where there's trash and refuse and broken glass and boarded up businesses and that sort of thing. And that kind of, that's a housing issue. And it seems to me we can't separate housing and public safety very far, except for organizational reasons. If we have a housing problem, one of the questions is, do we have an insufficient amount of housing? And one issue has always been that what we need to deal with is to increase the supply of housing. That's going to cost money, and it's going to cost all kinds of difficulties, zoning problems, all kinds of other things that you're familiar with. What is your general sense? There's several questions asked. What is your general sense of the best way to go about increasing the supply of housing? And we're not talking about encampments and how you deal with them. That's a different question. But if you were to be asked, what's your general sense of the best way to proceed with increasing the supply of housing, where would you come down, Mayor?
Sure. So a few things, and I'm going to bring in Andrew Meyerberg, who's on this call listening, who is my director of public safety. I'm going to ask, after I answer that question on housing, I'm going to ask Andrew to just, in response to the earlier questions on public safety, if he'd just like to share a few words. And just by way of background, Andrew, who's a very successful attorney, was from the Office of Professional Accountability, who looked at the accountability issues with the city police department. looked at investigations, and now has joined my administration on my floor as my director of public safety, who knows the balance between strong, effective public safety and making sure we are accountable. So, Andrew, when I asked you this question, maybe you could just respond if my listeners wouldn't mind. Again, I want to thank the residents of Skyline, Horizon, Mirabella for their willingness to really lean into these issues. So this is what I think is happening here in Seattle. And this is why I do talk to other mayors, that Seattle, when I was young, and I was young once, that poor people could live in my neighborhood. My parents were not affluent. They were just simple working class people, but a teacher, a retired veteran, a janitor could live in the core city. Now our city has become one of the richest in the country per capita, and that person struggles. And yes, housing now being the median house being north of $800,000 has priced out a lot of people. So what must we do about that? So number one, we are doing some phenomenal things, looking at community land trusts and looking at multi-tax exemption policies, and doing everything, using every creative tool we can to make sure that people of lesser income can stay here. We have to realize we have 84 square miles in this city, 84 square miles, but we still have literally thousands and thousands and thousands of zoning capacity that we have untapped. And so you're looking at us using our zoning tools to embrace density where it makes sense. And in my mind, it makes sense around transit-oriented development. I still believe in tree canopy and open space. And so I'm not trying to squeeze everyone like sardines in the city. And so it's a very balanced approach, working with neighborhoods, but embracing density. There's a quality of life issue for me that's critical in this city. And under my leadership, quite candidly, that's why I ran. And the quality of life has to do with graffiti, as an example, small businesses that are gone out of business and have plywood where a window once was. You look at the small business development support work we're doing, which is quite frankly unprecedented. We're starting a graffiti strategy to figure out, and I got money now from the state, and I have the state's attention on these highways and freeways that to me are intolerable. So not just housing and the supply of housing, we will build and treat our way out of this issue. We'll do as much as possible, but I'm also looking at the quality of life. And so my housing policy reflects a certain quality of life I still want for people in the city. But I have to tell you that, and you folks at Skyline, Horizon, Mirabella, I know you understand this, that Seattle has changed within our lifetime. 40 years ago, if someone would have told you the average house is going to be, north of $800,000, $900,000, you'd have said, in what city? Not the city of Seattle. So this hand that I have is a tough one, but some cities are doing some pretty creative things, and we will be the most creative. So I have a housing sub-cabinet of experts, and I'm brought in people from the private sector. One of the first things they said is I could assist in the design review process. It takes too long to build, which drives up the cost. They also said I could get creative on some of the regulations that are involved in the building process. This is not a free-for-all for developers, but there's some really conscientious developers that understand environmental sustainability. They understand quality of life. They're just not going to put up crap, to be candid with you. They put up some good units for people of lower income to live. And that's how we're going to proceed, with a sense of urgency on the housing issue. And having said that, Andrew, can we allow Andrew just to chime in on some of the public safety issues, if I could be so bold to ask?
I'm not sure we can get Andrew in this discussion.
I think I'm in, Bill.
I'm sorry.
I think I'm on, if I can address it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I wanted just to hit a couple of points that the mayor had made. First, Bill, you had raised a couple of questions about the monitor's report. What the court monitor said is that SPD is in compliance with all of their areas of the consent decree, and what that means is that SPD has met the requirements that the federal court set for it, and has kind of come through this process a better police department. So I think first and foremost, it's really important to note that. Two other things to note for the group is, first of all, What we want, and I think what the mayor has said over and over again, is you want a learning department. You want a department that's going to improve over time and learn from its mistakes. And when we talk about 2020 and some of the protests that occurred there and some of the trust that was lost, the department went right to work to try to gain that back, revamp policies, has created a new unit to coordinate and communicate with protesters to avoid escalation of events. So that's what I think what we're looking for in a department. What the consent decree tried to create was a department that would learn and grow and evolve over time. What I also want to say is, with disparity, it's a big deal. We are concerned about disparities in use of force and in stops. But SPD does have really a first in the nation system to analyze disparities and to look at the data, like the mayor said, and to really delve into why is it happening and how can we stop it? And really, that's the first assessment that we need to make. So I think we feel really positive about where we are in federal oversight and where the monitor landed, and looking forward to continuing that over the next year. And also, I think it's really important to echo the mayor's statements about that third department. We are looking across the nation for examples on how to do this well, whether it's a solo response or a joint law enforcement and social worker response. What we know is, as what the mayor said, is that, not every call needs to be handled with a gun and a badge. So how do we identify those calls that are safe for a social worker to go to that doesn't have a threat component? And that's a lot of the work that we're doing. And we want to stand up a sustainable, effective system. And that's some of the stuff we're going to be working on over this next year. And what I'll say too is, you asked the question, Bill, about the council and about how, we'll work with the council to fund some of these efforts. And this administration, I think, more than any other administration in recent history, has an incredibly positive relationship with the city council. And really, we view them as partners. We cannot do this without them. And the mayor has said this over and over again, we are one Seattle, and without the city council, we can't do this work. So, and I think a great example of that is the recent, the lifting of the proviso and getting us money to do recruiting. To do recruiting well and to bring officers back into the police department. So we're really enthused with the direction that this is going. And in the city, is it as safe as we want it to be right now? No, but I think we have the plans and the tools in place to get us there.
Thank you, Andrew. That's helpful. And do keep in mind, when you say I ask questions, I'm not asking any questions. I'm just transmitting questions to you from other residents in these three institutions. And so I think it is true that we got a number of questions of that sort that came up. Another question, and still on the question of housing, is the question of encampments and how well we're doing in clearing them in ways that are efficient and compassionate. And that turns out to be as you know, a very complicated matter. And we've had some real successes and some that didn't go so well. So, but what does the mayor think about the removal of encampments and the process, the people, the criteria you use, and the compassion you use in the encampment removal process? But what's the mayor's thought about that?
So we have placed more people in housing. We gave the statistics today of the shelter and housing and permanent housing options we gave to people, those who accepted. We gave that today at Woodland Park for that particular encampment as an example, which was the largest encampment in the city that has been removed. And some of our toughest critics couldn't refute the data that we put forth. After that, we returned back to the office and we continued our work on a dashboard that will be presented in 2 weeks that will identify every single tent and encampment that either is there or has been removed. We put out the data on where people have gone, what kind of shelter they will get. This is math, but this is real work, and this is hard work. This is a coordinated approach with a few groups that I started. I started a housing subcabinet, which looks at everyone that touches housing. The police department touches housing, human services touch housing, not just the housing department. And we make sure that they are coordinating. SDOT touches housing, that there's an element of person that is homeless in a right of way, how they interface. So we started a united care team to make sure that our approach is coordinated. And so our approach is, quite frankly, an effective approach. And it took time to build these systems. I did not inherit these systems. So what you're not hearing is deafening. And by that, I mean, what you're not hearing at Woodland Park, that when we remove encampments, is that we just move them from one place to another, right? The Regional Homelessness Authority Executive Director, Mark Doan, said, the first part is knowing who you are removing to house them. That's the work we're doing. This is sustainable work. And again, I said, we're not taking victory laps, but we'll open up the data. I'm not afraid to show the city. And this has never been done before, by the way. It's never been done before, the approach we are taking. So we're on the cutting edge, I think, of looking at, and I've also on how this should be done. Now that there's three elements, there's three pillars. The first one is always going upstream, looking at the triggers on when in high school or middle school might the triggers or the indicators be apparent such that this person may fall into homelessness. Coming out of high school or dropping out of high school, what are the signs? So that's a part of the work we're doing. Where are the social connections failing? We are in crisis response, which is the second pillar, and that's what people are focusing on, crisis response. I will pull us out of crisis response and look at the long-term solution, which is housing and treatment. So in our three pillars, people are caught up in the crisis response. And the pillar approach that I'm using, again, is new. And I've tried to read everything I could on how to solve this problem and bring in people that are much smarter than me on this approach. But I'm bold enough to make sure that when I say we'll get our parks back and we'll get our sidewalks back, is not because I'm criminalizing the people that have used this as de facto housing. So our approach makes sense, it's sustainable, and we're going to be aggressive in its implementation.
And you've said, I think someplace, that every time that there's a sweep, as they call it, of an encampment, that every resident in that encampment will have presented to them an option for some kind of suitable housing as an alternative to living where they are. Is that the case?
That's the case, and that's the law that I passed when I was on the council. It's the housing first approach, that we house them first, that we have to offer shelter, and that's how we have gone about it. So I have to rapidly build and identify units. We identified a goal of 2,000 our first year. We are on track to achieve that. We'll produce that data in a matter of weeks. But quite candidly, as I said, we work 7 days a week. My wife knows that. You know, I haven't had dinner yet, and I'm already put in about 13 hours today. And quite honestly, I don't know if other mayors have taken on forums like this and met the fine people at Mirabella and Skyline and Horizon, but that's how committed I am to this city to get us back on track. And I will say this to my friends at Mirabella, because I know that they had a source of disappointment on the monies that they had raised to help out with the housing. I too was disappointed that the city could not identify a suitable place for them to use their generous funding to help people. They just want to help. And I was also disappointed on how it was described in the newspaper, because I dedicated some pretty capable staff of trying to look around. I actually took a drive with them in many lots, and I would say, well, what about this area? What about that area? And I had them looking in many areas. We could not find anything suitable. So it wasn't as though we neglected the issue. We just could not find an adequate solution. I know they raised a little less than $150,000, I think $143,000 or something along those lines, which just showed their kindness and their generosity, and we couldn't put that one together. But I'll take that as a temporary setback. That doesn't mean we're still not out there looking. I've just identified another 40 units today. I visited Salvation Army last week, and I think we're going to develop another 50 units on their current facility. So every single day we're producing and finding units we can use. And quite frankly, at some point, I hope the city will simply say, you know what, I may not agree with their approach, I may not agree with everything, but God darn it, they really have the energy and tenacity to really get the city on the right track. And I'm not doing it for the thanks, but I have to tell you that when we had our press conference today at Woodland Park, we answered every single question that they had with data, the housing solutions we found. And it seemed like a never-ending litany of questions on everyone wants to find out what we're doing wrong. What are you doing wrong? What are you doing wrong? Well, maybe we're doing a few things right. Okay, because I think we are, because I have the right people in the right places.
Well, I think there are a lot of people that believe, I do, that you're doing a lot of things right. And we really do appreciate that. The residents here do too, and wish you well for your future in these directions. I would like to, we're going to run out of time. I think if this program runs out of time, I hope the conversation does not. I think it would be interesting to have this conversation continue in some way or other so that you can have a chance to see what people in this particular age cohort living in this particular part of the city think about some of these things, because we are very directly affected, and maybe we can do something like this again sometime soon. Before we leave, I must thank all my friends at McReynolds House and at Mirabella and at Skyline for the questions they submitted. And you should all know, I'm sure you heard some echoes of your questions in my attempts to consolidate and summarize them. But thank you for those questions. They're very well drafted. And what I'm going to do is send to you, Mayor Harrell, a copy of all 40-some questions in their full transcript, so you can see exactly how they were phrased and I think this would be a good list for you and your staff to, if you ever want to know what people in our situation, in our cohort, and our location feel about some of these things. It'll be a good checklist of what people think. And then, of course, we have to thank you for sparing your dinner and coming to talk to us. Really appreciate that very much. Now, have I forgotten to thank somebody that I need to thank? I think I've
No, I think you're doing a good job. Just the final question would be, sure, what can we do to help?
Well, that's the point. This whole set of conversations is not only to inform us, but to give us some clues as to how we might put an oar in the water someplace. It may be that there are some of us who can help with some of these things at many levels in many ways. And there are a lot of competent people in these three institutions. And a lot of them would really like to be able to help if there's something that could be done. And Seattle has a long tradition of help from the private sector, and we could be a part of that too. And so if ideas occur to you, or you think about ways in which those of us in this situation can be of use, I hope you feel free to call and ask, because I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for participating in that kind of work. Indeed. That, I think, is about all I have, unless you have further a closing argument, Mr. Mayor.
Does he have a comment to answer?
Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
does he have an answer to that question of how we can help?
Well, do let us know if there's some way we can help. That would be very good.
My closing argument, if you will, was going to try to answer that question. And first, I want to thank you all. Number one, the help that you've given me, you've already helped me. And let me be very specific on what I mean by that. That I do a lot of voter registration. That for the life of me, I don't understand why people would not exercise their right to vote. And I understand there's issues. People are busy. They don't understand the importance. But the three organizations mentioned here hosting this, they screen candidates, and quite candidly, they've been very supportive of me, and not just me, but other viable candidates. That you are protecting people that perhaps don't even vote by saying, let's get some pretty sober-minded people in this position. So that is probably the best thing you can do, is make sure you're doing the work and screening your candidates. So thank you for that. I owe you FaceTime like this because of the work that all of you've done as retired professionals and philanthropists and people who have been civic minded. You've paid your dues. So I do not have an ask. But I will tell you, we have our day of service this Saturday where everyone, no matter what your capability or abilities are, could do something. But I wanted to specifically look at people who are like me, I say seasoned, what they can do. And we're working on that as sort of a second leg of what we're going to be doing. So I hope to have a better answer for you on how I can help, because I believe that that's one of the problems in this city of Seattle is good people, smart people, committed people. They don't know where their entry point is to solve these issues. So give me a little time to think through that. It could be something as simple as letting me bring in, or some of my staff bring in, some young people so you all could share some wisdom with them, and it could be a joining of minds. But let me think about that. And last, I want to tell my friends at Mirabella, once again, I'm very sorry that we couldn't put those funds to use the way they had intended to. I'll chalk it up as lack of experience on our part or whatever. We'll take ownership of that. And I'm sorry we put some people in a pickle there. So thank you for this forum. I hope to be a great friend to all of you, and you'll see me again.
Thank you so much, Mayor Harrell, for being with us tonight, for answering questions, for giving perspective on the challenging issues. And I think we all know this is incredibly complex. And what I hope that we all appreciate is the energy and effort that you and your administration are taking to tackle this. It is not a linear solution. It's a very jagged line on how you get there, but you appear to be strongly interested in solving it, and we appreciate it. Bill, thank you for hosting and doing the moderation. And mostly thank you at Mirabella and at Skyline and Horizon House residents for submitting questions that show your concern and shows your level of engagement. And hopefully we'll have a chance to have more of these events in the future and have a partnership to making a better Seattle. Thanks again, and good night.
Good night.